In early spring, in the woods of north-central Pennsylvania, when the forest is just waking up from its long winter sleep, and the nights are still cold, but the days are growing warmer, the mighty maple tree begins to sing its sweet spring song. The sound of sap dripping in a bucket. It's a sure sign that it's maple sugaring season at Miller's Purely Maple. For Dale and Melanie Miller, owners of Miller's Purely Maple in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, the art of maple sugaring is a family tradition.
A few years ago, we decided to make some maple syrup for our own use. So we tapped about 100 buckets, and those buckets seemed to be a signal to the people passing by that it was sugaring time again, and we were able to sell all of the syrup we had made that year.
Thick, rich, amber-colored syrup, creamy, smooth maple cream, melt-in-your-mouth maple cotton candy. It's hard to resist maple's uniquely sweet flavor, and it all starts here. Miller's maple products are made from the sap of this tree. The sugar maple grows only in the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada, and it's easy to spot during autumn.
I believe the maple tree is the prettiest tree in the woods. We find it dark green leaves in the summertime, and after the fall frost, the reds and yellows and oranges that come out literally light up the whole landscape.
Sugar maples can grow as tall as 100 feet. That's a long way for food to travel from a tree's roots to its uppermost branches, and that's the job of sap. Sap is a watery liquid that carries nutrients from a tree's roots up to its branches and back down, much like your blood supply that carries oxygen to all of the cells in your body. When sunlight hits the leaves in a tree, it forms sugar and other nutrients that are stored in the tree's sap. As the sticky sap trickles downward, it serves as a food supply for the tree and for maple sugar lovers everywhere. No one knows for sure who first discovered the maple's sweet secret, but it was Native Americans who taught the early settlers how to get the sap from the tree and boil off the water to make maple syrup.
The Native Americans discovered that sweet water dripping from the maple tree made a delicious drink. They collected it in birch bark containers. From there, they would transfer it into hollowed-out logs to which they added hot rocks from the fire. Those rocks helped to evaporate the water from that sap, and the result was a sweet, sticky syrup.
Today's maple producers use modern equipment to gather sap and make maple products, but the process of making maple syrup hasn't changed. The first step is tapping the trees.
Tapping the maple tree has evolved over the years in different processes of what was available at the time. You probably remember maybe even seeing buckets on a tree, and still do today. And oftentimes they were used to collect the sap from the maple tree. Today we use food-grade plastic and a plastic tubing which transports the sap off the hill to the tanks where we collect it. We're very conscious of the tree's health. We want to protect the maple tree. It's our livelihood. We only start tapping trees after they reach the age of 20 to 40 years old and usually a diameter of 10 inches. We're very careful when we put the tap hole in the tree. We drill a sharp, clean hole. We have also gone to smaller taps, which allows us to drill a smaller hole to do less damage to the tree. We look for trees that have a wide crown. By this I mean trees that limbs that spread way out that allows the sunshine to reach the leaves to increase the sugar content of the sap. We only remove about 10% of the sap from this tree, very similar to the person who goes in and gives a pint of blood. The removal of the sap from this tree has no effect upon the tree's health.
Usually the maple season starts in mid-February and lasts through early April. The amount of sugar in the sap varies not only from season to season, but also from day to day.
The making of maple syrup is totally dependent upon the weather. We oftentimes wonder when to tap. If we see an icicle hanging from the tree in early spring, we know that it won't be long and the days will be warm enough for the sap to start to flow. We need cold, frosty nights of 25 degrees and warm days of around 40 to 45 degrees for good sap flow. This oftentimes in our area takes place sometime between the middle of February and the 1st of April.
Wind from the east, sap goes least. Wind from the west, sap goes best.
We really don't know why this is so, but this saying tends to be true. Many factors affect the flow and concentration of the sap.
There's a building sense of excitement as maple season approaches. It's a very special time of year in the Miller household, but it's also a time of hard work. First, about 3,000 taps must be set, a job that takes about 4 days.
The removal of sap from the sugar bush today is much different than it was in the past. Today we use plastic tubing strung on lines. We also use a vacuum system to facilitate the removal of this sap as rapidly as possible. In the past, the nostalgia of gathering sap was a scene of a horse-drawn sled through the woods with a crew of men dumping buckets into the gathering tank to take that to the sugar house. Today, after the sap flows from the tree through plastic tubing into these tubes, it flows into a tank which is then pumped directly to our sugar house. Nothing was without its problems. Today we constantly have to walk the lines to check for damage from rodents, mainly squirrels who chew into the line to allow the sap to run underground. One time when I was patrolling these lines, I even found a place where a bear had bitten through the line, allowing the sap to run out onto the ground.
The magic of turning what looks like water into a treat loved by young and old begins at the sugar house. In earlier times, steam rising from the log huts in the woods heralded the arrival of the maple season. Today's sugar houses may not be made of logs, but what goes on inside is basically the same syrup-making process that's been used for generations. When the raw sap arrives at the sugar house, it's about 98% water and 2% sugar. It takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. All of that excess water has to be boiled away. Stepping inside an old-time sugar house was like taking a steam bath.
The old-time sugar maker would have boiled his sap in an open pan over the fire in his sugar house. This created so much steam that you couldn't even see in that sugar house. But with today's specially designed equipment and covered pans, the steam is directed up through pipes and out the roof.
Producing maple sap and getting that sap out of the sugar bush and getting it to the sugar house is only one aspect of making maple syrup. Once we reach the sugar house, the real work begins. We need to evaporate the water out of that sap. The sap coming into the sugar house has about a 2% concentrate. When that goes into a large pan atop the evaporator, we preheat that from the steam in the lower pan, and then it goes into that lower pan to be evaporated. It's probably the only aspect in nature where the little guy pushes the big guy around. And what I mean about that is when the sap goes into the evaporator, the low concentrate sap starts pushing that that's already in there, which is more evaporated, around. It goes through different sections of the evaporator, constantly getting denser and more boiled down to the point where it gets to the pan where it starts to make syrup. Once it reaches this stage, we must be very careful not to burn it and spoil the delicate flavor of maple syrup. We watch the thermometer very closely, and when it reaches 7 degrees above the boiling point of water, we draw it off into a bucket. Thence we have made 2% sap into 66% concentrate, and we have made pure maple syrup.
After the syrup is made, we run it through a filtering system to remove any sediment or impurities that might be in the syrup. As a result of that filtering, we have sugar sand and pure maple syrup that's 100% fat-free and all natural. All syrup is graded for quality. The grades of table syrup: grade A light amber, also called fancy, grade A medium amber, grade A dark amber, grade B, which is cooking syrup, or grade C, which is commercial quality.
Maple syrup is a sweet creation by itself, but it's also used to make many other delicious maple products. Different boiling temperatures and cooling methods produce a variety of maple treats. Though they all look different, they're made from the same product, maple syrup. Today, you don't have to live in the Northeast to sample the sugar-sweet taste of pure maple syrup. Modern equipment and wider distribution have made it possible for everyone to enjoy maple products. New tapping methods, plastic tubes, vacuum pumps, evaporators. Over the years, a lot has changed in the maple syrup business. One thing hasn't. The old-time goodness of pure maple syrup is just as sweet as ever. And when the mighty maple tree begins its sweet spring song, it's a sure sign it's maple sugaring season. At Miller's Purely Maple in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, it all starts here.